decimos que no, tratamos, pero es el mismo, como el mismo proceso de imponer o querer imponer.
And this should be working if I do that. And there we go. Okay, so there's that.
Wow. Ujú. Sí. No. No, pero es que Malcolm es una cosa. Pero eso es lo mismo que pasa con el idioma. Los que controlan lo que se agrega o se quita de un diccionario también son la gente que tiene dinero y por supuesto que la mayoría son blancos también. Son manejan que se puede aprobar o no. So, oh my gosh. ¿Con lo que?
Yes, I'm going to start now.
Okay.
Okay. Later, I'm not making this up, it happened, so don't do that. I need to tell you where the exits are because you can't see them. You have an exit stage right, stage left, and in the back of the house. As you can see, we are social distancing and we're asking the audience to wear masks. So, wear a mask. The presenters do not, because then they sound like that. It doesn't work. So the presenters, we'd ask not to wear masks. In the audience, we ask to wear masks. Turn off the cell phone. That's all I have to say. I'm good. I want to thank you all. Oh, I didn't tell you who I am. Hi. My name is Jude Shands. I'm the Director of Programming here. I'm here today with my colleagues Linda Soldo, Kelly Gordon, and Charlie Faso. Oh, there you are. And Larry Mosier, the sound guy, and video guy. Hi, video people. I want to thank everybody for coming out today. I saw the snow and just went, no. We appreciate your efforts and that you came out in this mush. Thank you very much. And I'm sure everybody up here thanks you. Long Island Traditions is presenting this program. They are a unique group on Long Island. They are presenting and preserving traditions and architecture and nature that is thriving and living, or nearly lost in some cases, on Long Island. And today we have representatives from a diverse collection of people, traditions, arts, culture. And this is all due to Nancy Solomon, who has done some amazing work from Long Island, like working on our bays and making a difference and keeping professions alive and architecture preserved. She's done an incredible job. Let me introduce you to Nancy Solomon.
Thank you all very much for coming out here today. As Jude mentioned, I'm the director of Long Island Traditions. We're based here in Port Washington, and we work with diverse groups in all the different communities around Long Island. And like many of you, I was quite horrified after the killing of George Floyd. And I thought to myself, you know, the struggles that he faced and his untimely death brought me to a very different place of concern. And I was frightened by what is happening, you know, in our communities and in our country. And as a folklorist, you know, we're supposed to really highlight, you know, the traditions that give people meaning and joy and comfort in their daily lives. But oftentimes, those very simple but important ways we have of identifying ourselves can be frightening to other people, which baffles me. So I decided that I wanted to bring together at least the people, you know, that I've met through my work as a folklorist to talk about their lives, their paths, their forms of cultural expression, and how we as a region can help recognize the importance of those cultural expressions and their stories. So I'm very pleased that we have such incredible women. We're going to be starting with Joan Hodges of Hempstead. Then we're going to be moving on to Adriana Devers of Westbury. Then we're going to go visit with Margarita Espada of Central Islip. And then we're going to end our first part of our program with Denise Silva-Dennis of the Shinnecock Nation. After we go through the presentations that all of these women, you know, have made, we're then going to have a discussion that we would love and encourage you to participate in about what we can do in our own communities to help support these cultural traditions and the peoples of Long Island. So we're going to start now with Joan Hodges of Hempstead, and let's give her a real round welcome. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming in this bad weather. I really appreciate it. My name is Joan Hodges, and I'm an African-American artisan/activist, and I am the very, very proud descendant of African slaves. I'm going to do the PowerPoint. Guess who this is? This was taken, as you can see, in about 1943. And I was maybe about a year and a half old, and I have like a bonnet on my head. Very innocent at that time. Okay. This is my mother and father. My father is a very fair-skinned Negro. He's sort of a mulatto. He lived in South Carolina, and when he came to New York, he passed for a white man. He was a self-taught mechanic, and he worked in a mechanic shop. And they hired him because they thought he was white, because he was very fair-skinned. And so my mother showed up, and as you can see, my mother's a very dark-skinned woman. And they told her, well, we don't have any colored people or black people working here. And she said, yes, you do. And she pointed him out. And of course, he was fired on the spot. That's that story. Okay, moving along. This is my father in the early 40s. And this picture, he must have been in his early 20s at this particular time. This is a photograph taken when I moved to Long Island in about 1965, and I lived in Lakeview. Lakeview is in West Hempstead. It's in between Rockville Center and Hempstead. And at the time, my children were going to the Malvern School District. And the Malvern School District was somewhat segregated. When I say somewhat segregated, it was segregated, but they didn't want you to know it was segregated. And we had trouble getting busing because they closed the Woodfield Road School. And because we didn't have a lot of people coming there, so they closed the Woodfield Road School. So my children had to go over to the Malvern School District, which was a little distance, and we needed busing, and they had to cross a very large street, which was Ocean Avenue. And we had trouble getting busing, and they did not want us over there, and we had to picket. And when we picketed, we asked Martin Luther King to come and help us. And that's Martin Luther King walking down Woodfield Road in Lakeview. And that was in 1965. And I got to meet him at that particular time. Okay. I was part of the March on Washington in 1963. Again, I shook Martin Luther King's hand, and this is my button from the Martin Luther King March on Washington. Thank you. This is one of my dolls that I made, and I started making black dolls because when my children were coming up, my daughter especially, we went to A&S's to look for dolls for her, and I wanted dolls, ethnic dolls, dolls of color, and we couldn't find any. So I had to make dolls. Why don't you show them the dolls that are right behind you? This is one of the dolls that I made, and this is a griot doll. A griot is an African storyteller, keeper of the peace. She has no face on her because the griot could be your grandmother telling you stories, because I know my grandmother used to tell me stories about her mother because her mother was just out of slavery, and my grandmother used to tell me stories about slavery and what the women endured and everything. And the griot could be your grandmother, it could be your uncle, it could be anybody, any elderly person who's passing down the traditions or passing down the folklores or whatever. So this is what is called a griot doll. And this griot doll has dreadlocks, and she has African attire on. And this is my griot doll. Why don't you show them the other doll? Oh. This is another interesting doll that I made, and this is a topsy-turvy doll. And it was said, and it's a folklore, it was said that African slaves were not permitted to play with dolls of color because it gave them a good concept of themselves. You hug a doll, you nurture it and whatnot. So they weren't allowed to play with dolls of color because the slave master didn't want them to have a good image of themselves. They were allowed to play with white dolls, but they were not allowed to play with black dolls. So this particular doll, her name is Sophronia, or Aunt Auntie, and she used to take care of the white children. That was her job. And I made this doll because, like I said, they weren't allowed to play with black dolls. So when the master came into the slave quarters, they knew that they would be punished if they were caught playing with the doll of their color. So what they did is they were very creative. They made a topsy-turvy doll. So this was to fool the master. So when the master came in, what they did was, this was Miss Anne. So they were playing with Miss Anne. They got to play with Miss Anne when the master came in, and when he left, they were back to Sophronia. So this is my topsy-turvy doll. Thank you. And this is a bride doll that I created, and it's the bride doll of my granddaughter, Saida. She's not here right now, but I made this particular doll, and I named it Saida. Okay. This is an African doll with a dress. She has dreadlocks. I didn't give her a name. But this is one of the creations that I made. I think I made it for a friend of mine so that she could have a black doll that her children were playing with. Okay. These are some of the African attires that I made over the years. There are kufi hats, there are scarves, and fabric, quilted fabric and leather. This is one of the quilts that I was working on in progress. It's a work in progress. And I was hand quilting this quilt. If you look, you can see the wooden loop around the quilt. Okay. Another one of my work in progress. This is an African-inspired quilt. I think I have that here. I finished that. Because I like the different fabrics, I just took different fabrics and put them together. Okay. Oh, this is my African crazy quilts. I do have that here. You'll get to see it. I just put all kinds of crazy stuff on it, different fabrics. It's a crazy quilt, because if you're familiar with a crazy quilt has all different kinds of textures, fabrics, and everything in it. So you'll see cotton in here, you'll see wool in here, you'll see silk pieces. And if you look very closely, you'll see little signals, signs and signals, because back in the day, African used different signs and signals. They never used straight lines, they always had crooked lines, because that way they said evil couldn't get through to crooked lines. Okay. This is the Underground Railroad quilt. The top of it is the monkey wrench, which the monkey wrench told the slaves that they were going by wagon and told them to get ready. On the second one, that's the wagon wheel, which indicate they would be going by wagon. The bear paw meant to follow the bear's trail. And the second one and the fourth one is, oh, I forgot the fourth one. I'm sorry about that. Okay, next. This is a picture of a quilt. Two women in Africa, they're churning wheat, crushing it. Okay. This is a mud cloth quilt. This is a piece of mud cloth quilt, which I did with a piece of fringe on it. Okay. Okay. Is that going to be on the screen? Oh, I thought it was going to be. Oh, I'm looking. I thought it was going to be on the screen. Okay, no problem. No problem. Okay. Okay, this is Yes We Can quilt, or my Obama quilt. This quilt was inspired by Obama, the first black African-American president. As you can see on this quilt, you see skulls, and the skulls are from the slave ships, and you see slave ships on here. And also you see Goree Island, where the slaves were. And what else do you see here? You see Obama, my Yes You Can button. And I was inspired by this woman I saw in Times Magazine when she first discovered that Obama was going to be president. She said, "Oh my God." And here you see Malcolm X, you see Obama, Frederick Douglass, and some other people. And of course, you see Harriet Tubman. And this is my Obama quilt. This is I call it my quilt, my fabric quilt stash, because I fell in love with all these pieces in this quilt, and I just cut them up and just put them down and just stitched them down on the quilt. And this is called my fringe quilt, my throwaway quilt or my fringe quilt. Okay, can we hold this one up? This is the quilt that you saw on the screen, and this is my crazy quilt. This is my African crazy quilt, and as you can see on this quilt, this is the Underground Railroad. These are some African artifacts. You see a woman up here jumping for joy, the North Star, and it's just a crazy quilt with all kinds of crazy things in it. And if you look closely, you'll find interesting crazy things on it: frogs, African artifacts, the Underground Railroad, different fabrics, mud cloth. My crazy quilt. Okay. You want to come back?
Thank you so much, Joan.
Thank you.
For sharing with you your beautiful work.
Thank you.
And a little bit about your family history. Our next presenter, whom I've only recently met, is Adriana Devers of Westbury. And Adriana came at the suggestion of Margarita Espada, who you'll hear from in a little while. And I have learned so much about her passion for poetry, for art, for hair, and for stories. So I'm going to turn this over to Adriana so that you can learn a little bit about her as well. And we're going to have a real treat. And here she'll read one of her poems or tell us one of her stories. So thank you very much, Adriana.
Thank you. Help me out. When I was 5, I looked forward to the afternoons when my mother would go visit my grandma's house. I would stay with my teenage sister, who would ask me, Jackie, do you wanna do your hair? Claro que sí, of course. To me, that spoke freedom to the rhythm of my favorite song. Y soy merenguera, hasta la tambora, merenguera hasta la tambora. To my mother, that moment of joy would translate to punishment. ¿Por qué le soltaste cabello a esa muchacha? Why did you leave her hair out? To my Uncle Pedrito, I've always been ojo negro, the one with the dark eyes. La morena de Cira, the one with a bright future ahead, mejorando la raza, making the race better, each step of the way. Then someone else would remind me, when you turn 13, you'll get a relaxer, and you'll be even prettier. I was 13 when we moved to Long Island. Now, with pin-straight hair, placed in a school hallway that felt like a never-ending labyrinth, realizing that my place was somewhere here, somewhere there, en el medio de aquí y de allá, here and there. A child, all of a sudden lost in translation, distraught, looking at the boxes that read Hispanic or Latino, white, African American, American Indian, or Alaskan Native. Those are the ones I recall. Misplaced, forgotten, deprived of what I thought was my identity in my new land. Each box burying the fact that my roots went deeper and further. As I got older, I had to fall in the deep end to find my soul. The drumming of my African ancestors awoke me. And then I discovered my skin. I discovered my hair, unveiling such magnificent beauty from within. So much pain from the history that has been hidden, the truths that I was never told. Sabina Ulibarri says it in his poem, ¿Quién eres? If you're a person without past, you'll be a person without future. If you deny your parents, what do your children have to hope for? I want to unravel the pain in our past, embracing all of its colors, its authentic beauty and greatness, owning my part, truly listening to the stories, breaking the cycle. Remember, as Booker T. Washington said, that there are two ways of exerting one's strength. One is pushing down. One is lifting each other up. I want to lift. I want to recognize how deep my roots go. Why straighten it? Why tell our children beauty comes from changing your physical self, denying what was inherited? I look forward to the day when my children don't have to check anything in a box, where they feel welcome whether they speak one language or the other. When he starts driving, and I'll feel at peace that he's safe on the road. When I was 5, I always looked forward to those days when my mother would go visit my grandma's house. When I was 13, I looked forward to the afternoons when I would sit on Pioneer Drive between Brentwood and Bayshore, once again in two borders. And I would listen and dance to and celebrate that no matter where I am, it's still my favorite song. Yo soy merenguera hasta la tambora, and it goes. Tiriring, tiriring, ting, 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 wepow, wepow. Because that was the celebration of my true identity. Thank you. And my name is Adriana Devers. Thank you so much for welcoming me into this space. Thank you for so much for what is being shared and celebrated. I am a poet. I am an author. A couple of my books are here, and my books focus basically on that same thing, on celebrating my cultural identity, on celebrating my roots, and embracing and really showcasing how proud I am of my skin, of my hair. As Nancy mentioned, that is very, very important to me just because of the experiences growing up, being born and raised in Dominican Republic, and having to kind of deal with the constant struggle of beauty, of being accepted in my own land as I was without having to change anything, you know, just being authentically myself. And then coming to the United States as an immigrant, still facing the same things. But then here I wasn't too American. My English was broken. I had to learn English. I had to adapt. So once again, as a teenager, I felt I'm in a new land and started wondering, where does my identity rest? How do I find it? And how do I make everybody else around me accept me and see me for who I truly am? After, well, actually before I had my children, I wrote my little one in full moon, mi Chiquitica en Luna Llena, which was my first children's book. Now they read it and look at it to realize that it was like a premonition of what my family would look like. And it's always within my work that I try to celebrate our Afro-Caribbean roots and show our children how proud we have to be of who we are. Oh, sure. Thank you. This way? Okay, perfect. And I'll just share a little line from here and then end with another poem that I wrote specifically for this. I wrote it at a workshop with Margarita Espada with Teatro Yerba Bruja, but I will showcase it here as well. And this one is: mi chiquitica en luna llena baila al sonar del tambor, remenea su cintura, canta su guaguancó. My little one in full moon dances away with the drums, swinging her waist side to side, singing her guaguancó. I like to play a lot or incorporate different cultural elements, making reference to the music and all the different things that bring us together. Nació con el ritmo en los pieses, sí que lo sabe bailar, entonando canto e hacha. Mi negrita nos pone a gozar. Born with rhythmical feet, she sure knows how to dance, chanting the hacha rhythms. My negrita makes us laugh. And hacha rhythms, I always share with the children that the canto e hacha were the way that our ancestors enslaved used to chant in the Dominican Republic to communicate with one another. So they would say something like, eh, ah, and then the other person on the other side would respond, and that's how they had to communicate. And that goes with hair as well. The piece that you see behind me was created by an artist named Laura Villagenao with the concept of hair. And when she did the piece, she was explaining to me, she was thinking of how our enslaved ancestors used the hair to map out different routes. She's a Colombian artist, but as you can see, we all share that part of our history, that pain that our ancestors went through.
Thank you very much, Adriana.
Thank you.
You said you have a poem.
Yes,
I
I have
forgot.
one more that I would like to share, and this one
Please.
ties it in with my grandmother, ties it in with the duality of the languages and being bicultural. As I mentioned before, this one was written during a workshop that I took with Margarita Espada and Teatro Yerba Bruja during the pandemic. And it's titled, Hija de quién? The daughter of. I am the daughter of Doña Chela, the righteous, the strongest. La que te daba una pela con la mirada y te enderezaba el futuro sin tocarte un pelo. I am the daughter of the Milagros, the guilt that buries her spirit alive, y la sonrisa que se pinta en su rostro cada vez que me ve. La hija de Cira y Fifi, los que han durado 45 años, 45 years, although I suggested a divorce at 8. Hija del tiempo, hija del olvido, of the solitude that keeps me grounded, unfinished poems buried in a mended treasure box. Little fairies floating through my cloudy skies. El sol robándose un espacio ausente. La luna danzando al son del tambor. That drumming, tying it all together, reminding me that I am more than a name, more than what defines existence. Hija de tanto, hija de nada, hija de la vida por estar aquí, hija del Dios por el aire que me otorga, hija del hoy y del ahora, hija del yin y del yang, the duality of life in the pure essence, the wholeness of my ego and my daily battle against it. In the end, I question, whose daughter am I anyway? Thank you.
Our next presenter is Margarita Espada. As you've heard from Adriana and myself, she is the founder and the executive artistic director of Teatro Yerba Bruja. I first met Margarita shortly after her founding artwork, What Killed Martin Lucero, was produced throughout Long Island, at schools, playhouses, and libraries. So it's my pleasure to welcome her here, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. It's like so close. Yes, I'm Margarita Espada. I have an art center in Bayshore, and the mission that I have, I'm an activist and an artist and a Puerto Rican woman, and that's exactly what we do, what I represent. I thought it was so important to have a space to really bring our voices together for people of color. So I came here as an adult. I was in my 30s. I was a high school teacher for 10 years in Puerto Rico. I wanted to do advance my career as a performer. I used to have a theater in Puerto Rico, a horror community, and an international career. Everything was great, but I needed to do, my master to move on. So I got a full ride at Stony Brook University to do my MFA. So I came, I was great, top 3 in the class, it was so beautiful. So when I finished, I realized that first when I came here, that I was labeled as a Latina. So That was a big shock for me because I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. My identity, yes, I'm indigenous, African descent, and European Spanish descent. So the whole mix, and I grew up in a rural area and also in a city around African Caribbean people, which is why I am too. So suddenly I become Latina. That was so shocking, like what is the mean to be Latina? And what is the whole labels, all these different categories? Because in Puerto Rico, you don't identify yourself as a Latina. We are our own country, our own identities, and whatever that means in a process of colonization through European descent. So that was like a big shocking. Also, as a performer and my cultural body, we walk, we talk with the body, we move, so suddenly I also need to learn to restrict my movement and the whole concept of colonizing and creating a new identity here. And yes, the third, obviously, the main one was language, having an accent, a broken language. So there was no space for me as an artist in Long Island. But I decided, like, being so strong and being an activist in Puerto Rico, say, it's not a space for me, I need to create my own space. So that's what I did. I started working in a basement, my mother is a woman always working with communities. That's what we do as a culture. So I started to meet people in that experience because I'm Puerto Rican and a US citizen. I learned about the immigration struggle. And I learned about the immigration experience for my other part of the communities here in Long Island. So it was very revealing, and there are a lot of support. My first play was in a Salvadorian consul, with a passport light, and or a basement with all, you can imagine. But theater, what I do is about space, someone observing and someone creating. And that's a sense of community. And that was needed. So I was working with my projects, and I realized a lot of artists came to me, Latino artists, because there was no space for them. African-American artists or people of color artists, and we are in Long Island. And so we decided to create together. So my vision of being only a theater person expanded, and that's why I created Art Center, so we can have a sense of community and create workshops and celebrate our identities from any aspect that we wanted to talk and share. When one of the main play, as Nancy mentioned, was What Killed Marcelo Lucero, was a play based on a real story that was really crazy. That was in 2008, in that 2006, 2007, 2008, we have in Suffolk County still lives and all the politicians, and they have a big anti-immigrant narrative here. So a group of high school students went and they killed Marcelo Lucero. So it was so shocking because for the first time in my life, we knew we suffer all these labor segregations here in Long Island, but I hate crime in my own community. So that for me was like, I really understood what is the meaning of really have a hate crimes, and I needed to respond. So I'm also a professor at Stony Brook University, so I got part of my students from Stony Brook for a master program and immigrants, and we created this play together. And I thought, wow, I got it. We put it together, a narrative based on real stories, and that's what I do. I'm a dramaturgy, I'm a theater director. That was easy for me. We did a lot of training. But when I performed, my first performance was in Stony Brook University and Hofstra University. So at the end of the play, when I present everything that happened on stage, I don't have an end, because I don't have an end. There's no end. So we need to have a dialogue. So the idea was that the play is a tool to create a conversation where we as a community can talk, because that's the first step. If I have the capacity to listen to you, and you have the capacity to listen to me, maybe it's a hope. It's a space where we can hold together and with respect. So that's what I did. So I went at the end, I was like, yeah, I don't have I stop the play, I don't have an end, so the people start to talk. But I realized in that moment that the play was bigger than me, that the energy in this community was so incredible that I don't have an answer like to manage the play. They was like, it was crazy. So I said, this is an incredible tool to engage other activists and also other community leaders, because I'm not an expert in immigration. I'm not an expert in different areas that I needed to be responsible. It's not only for me to present the art and go to the community, okay, this is what I'm doing, this is what I think, but we have a responsibility as an artist for that community too. So what I did, I created a panel with different experts in different areas to really give answer to the communities. Because it's not only when we do art and we're an artist, we need to be responsible for that community too. It's not about me, my surfiness or my worthiness or my personal research, but we're impacting a community. So we had this panel, and so we did good. We went for a couple of years doing the play, but sometimes also stay in my head like, okay, now we're having a conversation and we move out of the community. So what happened when the community is already engaged? We have a panel, everything is good. So we're missing something. So we did a call of action. We doing activism. You have a call and you need to do a follow-up. So we engage people from their own community to take care, the conversation, and we have a support system for communities after, so they can be changed in the community. In that way, when we create art, in my case, art for change, is mean like what kind of change we want and how the community really can have a conversation directly to follow up. It's not, it's great that art is beautiful, it's great that we have a space, but at the same time, how we are supporting that community that we use as an audience. So that's what we do with Teatro Yerba Bruja. We also have a different workshop. We have gallery space. We go to schools. And still, the struggle is every day. It's about who curates our art. I sit in different panels with the counties, with the states, and I see who have access to these applications, how the language is being, it's narrative that is not related to me. It's not related to our own culture, people, artists of color. So obviously, it's money with public funding in this case, or in general with foundation and everything. So they consider the economy, the power to support our arts is stay in one group, in a privileged group. In general, is based on race and economic power. And that's why our communities of artists of color, we stay always struggling because we cannot compete. So part of my work also as an activist is also to advocate in a different levels for, from foundations to politicians about the diversity in funding and the diversity in application forms, and to be sure that people have access and understand how the process works, and also the process of curating work, that there should be people look like me, they understand my culture and everyone's culture, so we can really have access. And we support a better society in Long Island, because I think it's great that people really see different art. And that don't mean my art have less value because it's not Eurocentric, or this color don't look like they should look. So that part of what exactly I'm doing too. Yeah, basically, that's what we do, and it's a pleasure when I see the transformations. Language is important for me, also to celebrate the Spanish language. For the first and second generation that lose that language, and how the disconnection between parents and children, and in the process that Adriana is mentioning, to integrating them in society, we need to celebrate who we are, our language, our beautiful culture. Thank you.
Before we move on to our last presenter, I wanted to ask Margarita, you have some beautiful things on your table. Can you just tell us a little bit about them?
Yes, girls. This is the mask from Gigantes. This one is from Ponce Orpo, Puerto Rico, and this one is for the African carnival that we do. The same for this one is made from coconut. It's a coconut. So carnival, as you know, carnival are so important in communities, especially because open the liminal space when people had the freedom to express themselves. So they're the two main carnivals. And we have, yes, our little drums. Okay, yeah. And I guess some important, I believe the toys are very important, obviously, because games are important to develop identity. So these are traditional toys from Puerto Rico, including this one, and this door too. So more like traditional coming out from my childhood, and I really miss how this is changing, how important it is to go back to these traditional toys. I think this one, two different, art pieces with the coconut too. Just to, so what I do, I always bring that and we raise my kid with this kind of toys too, so remind them the importance of handmade, artistic toys.
And are those from your childhood?
Some of them, and some I just saw it now in some art and craft. Yes. This one I perform with this mask too, especially with this one, yes. And this is just a drum, because drumming and Afro-Caribbean music is part of our identity, very strong in Puerto Rico.
Thank you, thank you. Afterwards, hopefully you'll be able to get a closer look at the beautiful artwork that's here as part of this program. Okay, wonderful. Our wonderful presenters include Denise Silva-Dennis of the Shinnecock Nation. And we met because of a project that I started and I didn't know what I was doing. I had gotten a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts to help do an after-school program at the Shinnecock Reservation. And we had, made some contact with a wonderful artist named David Bunn-Martin, who many of you may have heard of his work. He does beautiful murals about the Shinnecock heritage, and I met Denise Silva-Dennis because she had started working with the young people to do some oral histories about them. And so that brought us together. It was about 20 years ago, I think. And so I've really been, I feel like I've been blessed in having met Denise and have continued this relationship over these years. And so I'm going to turn it over to you so people can learn more about you and some of the projects that you're working on.
Okay. Well, thank you, first of all, Nancy, and also for the library for having us all. And I do feel so honored to be here with such distinguished women today. Next month is going to be the National Women's Month, so it's wonderful to be here and just to almost kick off that time, exceptional women, and there's so many of the stories that have been told that, is so similar to where I come from too, so it's wonderful that we're all networking and learning about each other. I'm a retired teacher, so always being educated and being an adult learner, that's part of all of our lives, because we don't learn about these stories, in any of the public schools. Things are starting to turn around. But I wanted to use some of my language. Akwe means hello, and in Tampak is friends. Denise Kwawidamo Natisuwas, that means that's my first name in the Algonquin language, and Silva-Dennis Nichapayawunk is my last name. Shinnecock Kwa Hasanamisko Nipmunk is Nichashayawunk. Those are my nations from Shinnecock, way out on the East End in Southampton. And then my father's nation is in Hasanamisko, that's in Massachusetts, in Grafton. Shinnecock Nitap, that means that is where I live. So I was always an art. I mean, I knew I was an artist even before I could get a piece of paper or a pencil or a pen, and I'm the youngest in the family. So my brothers and sisters were either in middle school or high school or getting ready to go to college. When we first moved on to Shinnecock, I was about 2 years old. And where we live, my dad had to build little by little because there's no mortgages out there. Sometimes people just have to live in their basements for a long time. Sometimes, to this day, people have to live in trailers for a long time. Sometimes people even have to live in tents because there's no help for us. We're on this reservation, which is our ancestral land, Shinnecock, but it's a peninsula. So 3/4 of the way, it's surrounded by water, and traditionally, it was our summer camp. So that's where we would go to go fishing, to go out whaling, to see where the whales were. It was the Atlantic right whale that we would venture, my ancestors would venture for. But then we would pull back into what we call the Shinnecock Hills. And in the 1800s, when the railroad came through, Long Island Railroad, they just decided with the town of Southampton that they were not going to allow us to have our Shinnecock Hills back. Just push them back onto the peninsula, and just that's where they'll be. They're good chauffeurs. They're good at, taking care of our grounds at our estates. They're good at raising our children. They're good at cooking food. So that's how I look at it. Like, keep them there to pretty much be servants to, the rich and famous of Southampton. I mean, that's what it was established for. So the mansions across from where we live, these just humongous mansions that have, 50, 60 rooms in them with 15 bathrooms. They get to see across the Hetty Creek in Shinnecock Bay, the beautiful, pristine area of Shinnecock. It's all woodland and some marshland over there. And we get to see their humongous mansions. That's from our viewpoint. So growing up in Southampton was interesting because our community is very segregated. The Shinnecock people mostly live on the reservation. Some families live also in the village of Southampton. Some people live worldwide. We have people who live all the way in Australia. And it really goes back in time because the men from Shinnecock taught the first colonists how to whale. And so it started out as a local industry, and that was like one of the first industries that really brought all this money to the new colonies back in the day. And these captains were able to build, that's when the first big mansions started up in the village of Southampton. And some people from the reservation back then were able to build what was called the salt box houses. So there were some of those houses that were around. There's some that are still standing. And that actually came from, working on those whaling ships. Every once in a while there'd be a captain on a whaling ship, not too often. Most of all, they would be first mates and the workers who would go, and they had, just heroes who would go after these whales. It was dangerous. And they would go all over the world, in Africa, in the Caribbean. They would go down in South America and go all the way around to Tonga and Hawaii, and then they would go to the North Pole after these whales. So that's part of our history that it's hard to find if you were to look up today to see, what about Shinnecock Indians? There's a picture here that I brought along with me, and it says, "The Last of the Shinnecock Indians." And there's a little girl on the end. So how are you going to say that? And even if you Google it today, Shinnecock Indians, it's going to come up with this picture, the last of them. So what I do is I do a play on words as my artistic way and satire, and I'm like, it's the last of the Shinnecock Indians who remembered living freely in Shinnecock Hills before Southampton town stole it from us and pushed us onto the neck. My mother-in-law, my husband's mom, Dorothy Dennis, she was at another presentation at Southampton at the Rogers Memorial Library, and there was a film about the Shinnecock people, and she commented, they pushed us and they pushed us until, where else were they gonna push us? Into the water? That was all that was left. But I also wanted to do a land acknowledgement of where we are now. So this would be the area where the Nissequogue and the Merrick and the Massapequa and the Secatog people would have lived, villages. And oftentimes, it's like 13 tribes of Long Island, and the only ones who still have a reservation are the Shinnecock people, and then also the Unkechaug, Puspatuk reservation. But there are also people from Montaukets, that Long Island Railroad. They pretty much destroyed them. They said they didn't even exist anymore when they went back to fight for their courts. So all this time growing up and learning about the history has influenced me. And my parents, being from 2 different reservations, we would make sure that, well, my parents would make sure that we always had our regalia. What I'm wearing today, you know, I wouldn't normally wear it except for special occasions. I'd be dressed just like everyone else. But just to pay tribute to the heritage, it's always important. We had one of our educators that I learned from, who was a teacher for many years, and our historian, and she kept the genealogy. Her name was Princess Noadana, and she was my mother, Loretta Silva, her first cousin. And she would always make public appearances throughout Long Island, and she would always wear her regalia. So Princess Noadana or Lois Marie Hunter, that's one of the people that I pattern, you know, some of the things that I do after. And one of the things that she would teach us, she was born in the 1800s, and she died in, I think, like 1970, in the 70s. But before she passed away, she taught us, we need to go, or you all, because she said, I tried, I couldn't do it, go and get Shinnecock Hills back because it was taken illegally. And the story behind that is the proprietors in Southampton had 10 signatures, about 10 signatures from Shinnecock people that said they were going to give up 3,700 acres in Shinnecock Hills in exchange for the peninsula, which is about 800 acres. And they passed it through the New York State Legislature, and it was all signed, sealed, and delivered. And then the people back then from Shinnecock hurried up and they said, no, we didn't sign. And those signatures, those people from Shinnecock, they don't even, they're in cemeteries. They took names from tombstones and, fraudulently had all these things signed. So some of the things that I brought with me is an old copy of an old map from the 1700s, and it shows where our ancestral territory at that point in the 1700s, it was much wider than even this map here. It was found with research done by Professor John Strong, who was a retired professor from Southampton College, and Gaynell Stone from Stony Brook. I think she's retired now too. She wrote a book about Shinnecock people, and they found this map that's all registered in New York State. It's in the library, and it shows here's where the Indian line is, and then the land goes from the Peconic all the way to Shinnecock Bay and over to Hampton Bays and beyond where our Westwoods territory is. So I did a painting. Right now it's in the Southampton Art Center called Outcropping. Because not only am I an artist, but my son is an artist, my daughter is an artist. She has some paintings there. But what I did is I combined the two. I combined that old map that shows where our old ancestral territory is, along with the people who are sitting there. And the little girl, I painted her in orange, and that's in reference to all the children that were taken away from all the different Native American people, and they were sent to boarding schools. And that's what happened to the people on Shinnecock as well. It's all across Canada. It's all across the United States. They're finding all of these children that are in cemeteries and unmarked graves. They never made it home. And I never even knew about that, people from Shinnecock were also taken away, like my mom's generation, until people started passing away and going to their funerals. And then the minister would say, oh, does anyone have anything that they would like to talk about this person's life? And that's when the stories started coming out about being taken away to the Thomas Indian School or having to go out to, far. It was far, and parents could not just go and visit. People didn't have money, didn't have cars to go visit their children, and just so sad. And they talked about how sad they all were, and they would cry because they wanted to go home. They were not from some of the nations, like they weren't from the Iroquois nation. They were way out here on eastern Long Island, so they didn't have, anyone close to them or other members from their nation nearby that they could at least, commiserate with while they were there. And the whole idea of taking children away was so they wouldn't learn, connections with their family. They wouldn't learn the culture. That was a way of stripping the culture away. They wouldn't learn how to cook. They wouldn't, the special recipes. So that's actually what happened to my mother-in-law. She was taken from Shinnecock, and then it wasn't that far away, but it was too far for her parents to go and get her. And she said, I remember when these doctors came to the reservation and these nurses, and she said that she was always very, very thin. That's just her makeup. And she said, oh, you look like you're sick. And she said, I'm not sick. There's nothing wrong with me. And they're like, oh, no, we have to take you. So then she said she remembers being taken, and the bed that she was returned to after a couple of years, she could come home and visit, but she had stretched out so much. She said, I just had to get into a little ball in order to fit back into that bed. So she missed all of these different things along with her brother during that time, learning from Nanny. So one of the things that influences my art today is to get the land back. And I've been teaching my children about the different history, and then they took on art. But then they became interested in my daughter in political science, and then she became an attorney, and then she went to University of New Mexico and learned more about getting the land back across all of the nations of Native Americans. She worked in Sacramento at a law firm that once represented our tribe. So she's taught me about all these different stories and put it together. One of the ways you could see it is a documentary called Conscience Point. And it will kind of tell a story of what happened to us, and not only to the Shinnecock people, but also the fishermen that are out on Long Island, also the farmers, what happened, because right now, every single piece of land is being taken up either for a mansion or condominiums, or there is no septic system out there. So all this nitrogen is just poisoning all the waters, and we still depend on fishing and clamming and oyster and scallops as our food. And so a lot of it's being just destroyed. And sometimes you'll see it, there'll be different studies, scientific studies, and it will show all these brown tides, like in western Shinnecock. But right around Shinnecock, a lot of times our section will stay nice and clear, but sometimes a brown tide comes to us too. And it's all because of the overdevelopment and how people live on the seashore. They're allowed by the town of Southampton to just keep building. Look at this beautiful view. Well, you're polluting, all this water. So all of these things have really influenced my art, and also, my parents taking us to powwows, making sure we had regalia. My mom was my first teacher, and we didn't have money to go and get, the beads and the different deer skin. So what we did the first time I learned from her is she had a trunk, and it was filled with all the regalia of my brothers and sisters. And they had outgrown it, but we would just keep everything. We always keep all of these different things, and then we pass it down or we remake it. So the first beadwork that I did, I was probably about 12 when I asked. It was in the summertime before it was time for Shinnecock powwow. And I said, Mom, could you show me how to do it? So she said, all right, well, let's go in the trunk and look. So I was little and tiny back then, and I could use my brother's breechcloth and just cut it down. And there was a little jar of beads, so she showed me how to string the beads on there. And then later, through the Shinnecock Native American Cultural Coalition, which was called SNAC, that came to Shinnecock through the church, worked on that. I think Princess Noadana was instrumental in that. And my oldest sister and brother-in-law, Pat and Skip, and Diane and Fred, and some other members of the reservation got together and applied for this grant. And with the grant, we were able to get some beads and some leather, and it was a revitalization of the culture. It was in the 70s when there was, so many problems in the United States. It was like Black power, but then all the rest of the people, Afro, power, all kinds of Native American power, and everyone was struggling to come back to the culture, because the culture was, it was kind of dying out, and language was barred. You weren't supposed to speak your language anymore. You were just supposed to go to the stores and buy their food, throughout this history. And, it was getting harder and harder to secure your own food. So SNAC really helped me by relearning the history of Shinnecock, and also learning how to do the different crafts. And like this one, for instance, here, with this piece that I have, I made this for my nephew. And it's just one bead at a time. You start out with a circle on the bottom of beads, and then you just tiny little needle, a skinny needle that gets through each and every one. So a lot of people don't have the patience to do that, but I prefer to do it in the wintertime. And if I could just get like 1 inch of it done, I'm happy. Or if my cat or dog dump the beads on the floor, I try not to get too angry about it. I'm just like, that's okay, that's all right, and make mistakes. But you just have to have patience and go back or put it away for a little while until you can come back to it again. So the way I got the wing, actually, this is from a mallard duck. And where I lived at the time on Old Point Road, it opens up to where there's hunting, lots of hunting, and it's part of the migratory area of marshes. So when it was time for duck and goose season, the hunters, I'd see them going past, going down, and then I'd flag them on the way from coming up from what we call the point. And I said, oh, do you mind, can I have any of the feathers that you have? So they would give them to me, and I'd be happy. And it goes back to don't waste anything. Whatever you use all parts of it. So then this would be a fan. You use it like that. And then you'd cool down when you're dancing. And this is moving right now. It should really be, nice and firm, because it has to be salted down. So while you're waiting for it to stiffen up, you salt it down to preserve it, and you pin it to a piece of wood. And while you're waiting for it to get harder and to, almost mummify, you beading.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Is my microphone on? Okay. And again, for everybody who's here in our audience, we really encourage you to come up and to learn more about the things that are on display here that these incredible women have brought and shared with us. just so everybody knows, there is a new art center on the Shinnecock Reservation called Ma's House. And it was started by Denise and her son, Jeremy. It's in her mother's house, which is now the art center. And so I encourage you to visit their exhibits and workshops. And you'll also finally get to see what it's like to be on the Shinnecock Reservation. Likewise, the Teatro Yerba Bruja has a wonderful center in Bayshore, which also has workshops and performances. And why don't you tell them a little bit about, what are some of the things that you're currently doing there?
Yes, we are in a Second Avenue Firehouse. It's the first firehouse in Bayshore, and basically it's more than 100-year-old. We're doing classes there. We are working our next women's show in March tour, I think. We're invited. I'm also working on Big Creek, Long Island. It's an A grant with the book An American Songwriter from Joyce Harja. And we're working in collaboration, actually, so we have an opportunity. It's been great to meet Denise and working with the Shinnecock and the Montaukers. And the power of reading and building communities, for me, was very powerful to pick that book and to get the grant, obviously, because I wanted also to build that bridge with the Latino indigenous. A lot of our immigrants, they're here in Long Island, they're coming from indigenous roots, and they speak their own language. Some of these people speak Quechua and everything. So at the same time, I'm also have indigenous root, and build together like we don't know each other, and we are connected through the indigenous root. And so that's an event in April 8th. Joyce Harjo is coming to Long Island. We have an event on the reservation in April. So it's a lot of events. I've also do the Puerto Rican Hispanic Parade in Long Island. I hope this year, we don't know yet with the pandemic, but it's the largest parade in Long Island, the second one in New York State. We bring together diversity, bring together is the Puerto Rican now Hispanic Parade, because we wanted to really embrace everyone to celebrate, and we open to everyone. So yes, we do writing workshop. Just visit our website or ask me, and we have something for you.
So we're going to transition a little bit and really get a sense of what things are getting better for you as women, as artists, and what are some of the things that we can do to help support the struggle for civil rights, especially among women artists of color. Okay, so who would like to tackle this first?
I could share.
Okay, Adriana, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you once again, and thank you all for hanging out and staying here with us. I feel that having these spaces and having these conversations, and for many of us to recognize what we share in common, the common history, the common struggles, and work together to bring about that change, that's huge. Like, to me, to be able to, have the support and have different doors open where I could, expose my children to all these new experiences, that's a big step in what we need to do. And things that I feel that we have to continue doing, it starts with the little ones. I really feel that all of these spaces and the books that we offer, they have to showcase that diversity. We have to share those stories with them. When they come home and they talk about, I think it was one of the readings on Indigenous Peoples Day, but we're still using material that refers to Columbus Day, and that kind of, highlights this great thing that was done. And, as a parent, I like to take the time to offer, our perspective and say, well, that's the one side of the story that's showed, that's being shown in the book. This is another side, and this is, this is what happened. And to see how they react and
have them be able to offer that, because I say, you know, you can go to school and you can offer that perspective, and you can bring this piece of literature and say, can we share this one as well? That's, you know, a lot of the change that we also need to see in education.
I was just thinking about, you know, Indigenous Peoples Day. That's new. That's, to me, mind-blowing that we can celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. But there's that part of me that says, but look what we're doing. We're taking the land still. So Denise, maybe you can talk a little bit about, you know, what are some of your thoughts on, you know, these recognitions and these struggles? I mean, it's...
That's true. The land is still being taken, you know, as we speak. And I'm like out here demonstrating right now at my son's, the Moss House. I was doing a residency that's going to be ending pretty soon. And like I said, and you know, I'm so influenced, the paintings that I do now, by what's happening. And I mean, it is looking up, because finally we have, you know, people, young people who are really leading the way, whether they're, you know, becoming attorneys, like my niece and daughter, but also having schools where they went to, University of Michigan, University of New Mexico, they had special education sections, and it's all about Native Americans across the country and constitutional rights. So they were able to bring that back. So that's something new that was not present before. Like during my time, there was no such thing. So things like that have developed. And also just, you know, out in Southampton, where we are now, my son Jeremy, our son, is also leading, it's called Outcropping Indigenous Art Show. And I believe that it's the only one that's ever been curated by a Native American, and then only Native American people. First from Shinnecock is one section, and then it opens up to Native American people from all over, and it's just different technology. And it's, you know, sometimes people think of like social media as a bad thing, but then it's a really good thing at the same time, because you can network, you can connect with other people. Nancy, that's how we got reconnected again. I think it was through Facebook. You found me, and I'm like, yeah, I'm still here, and I'm still doing art, but I am also still out there on the side of the road, you know, and protest signs saying, you know, you are on our land. You know, there was a whole big controversy also out there. We have what we call them, well, they call them bulletins, or we call them monuments, because it shows where you're entering Shinnecock territory, people. You are on Sunrise Highway right now. You're not just coming out to the fancy schmancy Hamptons. There's people who have always been here for 13,000 years, and descendants are, you know, still here. So I think things are looking up. But individuals, you know, are still not educated enough, because, you know, in places that they could be educated, they're not being educated. But I know there is one school that I'm just working with on the East End, the Peconic Community School, and they brought their whole faculty to come see Outcropping, and it's going to be there until April 9th. So I hope more and more people can come and see it, because it's a good thing. It shows that people are learning more about culture and bringing it into, you know, this century, and just how important it is just to remember where you are, because it's so easy to forget, you know, with the whole idea of the melting pot. And I mean, we've even had to fight in our school district, because people did not want to have Indigenous Peoples Day. They wanted to just keep it as Columbus Day. But we're like, Columbus never even stepped foot on this part of the hemisphere, you know? And why would it be that? And then, you know, I've heard other people, non-native people, say, well, you know, why is this, you know, why does it have to be, you know, with the Italians? There's Polish people, there's a lot of other people who don't have days. So, you know, what's the big deal about it? But yeah, I've had to go to a demonstration in my own school district. And then, you know, a lot of people who don't even live in Southampton, they'll come out, and it'll be the Columbus Day people, and they'll say, oh no, you can't get rid of us. I'm like, but you're here, like, this a little tiny section of the history, you know, indigenous people, they go thousands and thousands of years. So,
Joan, I know that a lot of your work incorporates the history of African Americans. Can you talk a little bit about, how things like, George Floyd and all of the problems, have affected you and in the artwork that you're creating?
When I think about what happened to George
You
Floyd,
got to talk into the mic.
when I think about what happened to George Floyd, it makes me think of when I was a little girl in Emmett Till. And I remember seeing him on Jet magazine and how frightened I was. And that same feeling came back to me again, and I'm saying, this is a lynching, but it was a ground lynching. It wasn't up in the trees, it was the ground. I do think we have come a long way, but I think people need to get out and educate themselves and to get involved with different programs and schools and communities, and they need to know what's going on and what's happening. And like me meeting these 3 new people together, I learned a lot today. And that we're all in the same boat. All of us heritage are basically come from Africa. And like I said again, I do believe that we've come this far, but we still have a long way to go. Excuse me? Oh.
And Margarita, I'm thinking about, oh God, when Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, I know you went down there. Why don't you talk about it? Your own personal history and your efforts, because they're really something that a lot of people probably don't know about. And
Yes, I was told you before, I'm 100% Puerto Rican from the island. With a lot of people don't know, I hope they came clear, we are a colony. U.S. took us as a Hispanic American world, and we went from Spanish, from part of the Spain colony to U.S. colony, and without a choice, and still is a struggle. And what happened is, like with Act Jones, that no one can do business with us, with Puerto Rican. Everything go through Florida. So that was clear. There was so much resources. Everyone wanted to support Puerto Rico, but they was not able. So a lot of stuff was damaged. And also the system, because we don't have our own economy, and it's becoming a very tourist attraction, and everyone wants to get a piece of land. It's paradise. And the misuse of funding is so crazy that now we are governed by the Congress law, which is called La Junta. Is a board that now our governor is not in charge. So they put the minimum wage for Puerto Rican people for $7. So how a Puerto Rican can live with $7 an hour? And it's keep us in kind of level of slavery through the economy. So we are losing our land. And I get so emotional because we are really losing our land. So everyone is going there, and the narrative, we go to the point, the narrative what we see is a paradise of tourism, but people there are really having a hard time. Teacher had no good salary, professional, that's one of the reasons why I came here, and people are leaving, but at the same time, people are going back, the new generation of people are going back and they're fighting. But it's a really deep political issue, because it's not a fair trade in Puerto Rico. So I think that was so clear, and we are U.S. citizens because the invasion of Puerto Rico, and because they needed veterans, they need people to go to war. So all my families are veterans, from grandpas to brothers, everyone. So we are a big military base, and people don't know that. But how that generates into a good quality of life. So they have military base for practice there, so they damages the land and everything. So it was so clear during the hurricane, that was so hard for me, because I was without communication for weeks with my mother, with my daughter that was in Puerto Rico University by then. And for me, the whole island came and support. We sent an airplane there, but I needed to be sure they went directly from grassroots people to grassroots people, because the government will be using as a political to make sure that everything look good. But how can you explain the U.S. territory is 8 months without electricity? You know, people die, and they only report 50 something dead, and we lose around 5,000 people because our grandpa was without much electricity for machines. So they no oxygen, babies die in the hospital, you know, all is dead. They came after the hurricane, and during the hurricane, people like, you know, putting bodies and, you know, really crazy. So thank God that we have some, you know, independent journalists to cover that, and that's our story. So it's hard. There was a great experience, and what came good about it is that we are over resistant, and this new generation don't buy more this narrative that you go to school, get a good degree, and you have a good job. So this narrative is no longer in place. This narrative is that you need to go and create your own business, go back to the land, farm, get you food, because that's what made Puerto Rican to survive. People was, you know, going back to fishing, going back to whatever, you know, La Plata or whatever. So it was Mother Earth that really saved the island, because it's an island. And that was good to see now how the farming is coming up, and also how the art, you know, and you see a little process through the art, and how united we are to create these activists, to create this, to people to understand that Puerto Rico is not like a beautiful place, which is beautiful, you know, with a lot of hotels, but there are people living there. Everyday life, driving, going to school, no teachers, they're closing schools, so basically they're kind of eliminating us and becoming a big tourist attraction. So it's hard, but that we're fighting for, you know, to be sure that, and thank you for that question, because that brings the awareness and for me to share our story. And I wanted to add something about the first question about women. It is important that it's a good narrative now about race, or this issue coming up, about our identity, about class, but I feel that still the gender is under. I feel that still we need to bring more this conversation about women and in the workplace, as an artist, because we get so busy, you know, talking about our identities, but when we come to gender, still you don't get the right place, and still you go to this gallery, still, okay, we have, now we are being about people of color, but now you have, you know, a Latino male or a black male, so where are the women coming to this place also to make that decision? And still I feel that we are like still sitting back, like, okay, you know, that's nice, we're making progress, but so I think it's important to bring that female voice and keep moving into that conversation too.
I want to open it up for questions from our audience for the women. So if you have a question, now's your chance. Would anybody like to share a story of their own struggle for civil rights? What is your name, by the way?
My name is Betty Avery.
Thank you for coming.
But the thing that I remember is when she mentioned Emmett Till, when I was a little girl, around his age, I do believe. I was shocked when I saw the picture and how disfigured he was. That has never left me. George Floyd? Yes.
back to me again. You know, so that's why it's good to share and know what's going on here, 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 so that we'll know, and you'd be surprised how it changes you. You know what I mean? The more you learn, the more, sometimes we think we're the only ones, and we're not, you know. So that's the one thing that I remember so well. I'm 80 years old. And when I thought about Emmett Till, I
Yes.
thought, what? The face was so disfigured. And that's the one thing that I can keep in my mind. And then last summer and all of this, George Floyd and all of that, it
Yes.
came coming back to me. So the more we share, the more we learn from each other and realize how vital it is to share and be a part of, because we're not the only one. Sometimes we think we're the only
Yes.
one, and we're not.
Thank you very much, Betty. I would like to ask the artists if they have questions for among themselves or to the audience. So, Joan,
Well, I'd like to thank you for commenting on that, because I thought I was the only one that still seen Emmett Till's face, because it never leaves me. It never leaves me, and I still had that vision. So thank you for sharing that with me.
I just wanted to also comment, you know, there's so many people who have been so brutalized. And, you know, for me, being born in the 60s and just seeing, you know, also the little girls that were killed, you know, in the church, you know. And then one of their names was Denise. So, I mean, I would always remember that. And also, I remember seeing those pictures of Emmett Till as well. And then, you know, people like to put us in like these boxes as if what happened to another, you know, people's culture only affects those people, you know, and it's not. It's like it affects us all. And I remember, you know, after when George Floyd was killed and there were so many demonstrations, and out in Southampton, you know, they put all these boards up in some of the stores because they said, oh, well, they're going to come here, they're going to go to Bridgehampton and bring, you know, to the streets what happened to make it humane so that other people can know, you know, this is affecting us all. And I went to one of my childhood friends and I saw her in a store, and she's a white, you know, a woman. And she said, well, it is terrible what happened to George Floyd, but that's not around here. And it's like, but it's affecting us all. You know, I feel like I can, you know, as soon as you're saying mama, mama, that anyone who's a mother should have gone to right straight to their heart, or a father as well. So, I mean, it might, you know, not, you know, maybe that incident didn't happen where you happened to see it in the backwoods of Southampton, but historically it has happened. You know, Shinnecock people weren't allowed, the men weren't even allowed at one point to go into the village. Only the older women could go. And they have it, if you want to research your history, they'll have it where they, you know, wrote it down. But one thing that was like a little silver light, which I did want to also mention, was this Nyamuck Land Trust, which I'm on the board member. And for this land that was taken away, that's what we're trying to get back. As you were talking about the land in Puerto Rico and, you know, going back to the farm and then going back to the water. So this is what we're trying to do, preserve, because these mansions that are being built, they're digging up our graves, these people's graves, in order to put their mansions up. And it's just, or in tennis pools and the swimming pools. And so that is really important to mention as well. And Graves Protection Society have just once again influenced me. And then another silver lining that has developed also, we have the Shinnecock kelp farmers. And it's women who are going out into where it's so polluted in the water in Southampton and Shinnecock Bay, and they're raising these kelp. And they just had a little presentation at the Southampton Arts Center. So that's another one to follow on Instagram. It's Shinnecock women who are raising this kelp, and what it does is it pulls nitrogen out of the water with these kelp plants. So that's another great thing, another little silver lining, you know, and it's so nice to have allies. It's so important to have allies, because where we'd just get beat down in the street for standing there. That's what happened with my cousin Rebecca Ginia from Shinnecock, who's been out there for decades and decades and decades with her posters. You know, literally getting beat down. And then, you know, one of the allies who was from the civil rights movement also, he came to help us. And his arm got broken. So that's also in Conscious Point. If you ever get a chance to see that documentary, it's really incredible how scary it is for allies to try to come forward and help, because we were supposed to be hushed. You know, don't tell, you know, this history, because it might hurt the ones who are not of our color or our background. But it's not going to hurt them. It's going to make our whole society so much better and so much healthier when we talk about, this is, okay, this is what happened, this is the truth.
So
You know.
I have a question for Denise, because I just gave, we got some funding to help support various kinds of projects, including oral history projects.
Right.
And so Margarita is going to be starting a big oral history project, you know, with Teatro Yerba Bruja. This is kind of like a kickoff, we hope, to get people excited. Is anything like that being done on the Shinnecock Reservation? Is anybody recording the stories and the histories of the people who, you know, have learned them from their parents and their parents?
There have been, you know, some of recordings. We had once had the Shinnecock Museum, so I know that they have done recordings, but since, like, even before COVID, that's been shut down, so
Yeah,
that's
okay.
something else
Okay,
that needs
so maybe
to be.
we should talk and see if
Yeah.
we can get that back going.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But I know Jeremy, he's doing a lot of portraits that were developed at the Rogers Memorial Library. So he does a lot of narratives about that. So there are people who, and there are individuals, you know, all you got to do is go on YouTube.
Yes, this is true.
And also Rogers Memorial Library, I know that they have a catalog of recordings.
Great, great. Yes, there's a question.
I am a proud Italian American, but I am completely on board with Indigenous people thing. Because as proud as I am of my history, when I joined the immigrants, you know, the immigrant experience is varied, so varied. So I was wondering, maybe Indigenous Peoples Day and maybe Immigrant Peoples Day, maybe put the two together somehow, or another Monday for immigrants. That's just a suggestion.
Yeah, that could happen.
There's a question in the back. Yes. Can you talk a little bit louder or stand up so we can hear you? Thank you so much. One last question, because I know it's getting. Oh, thank you.
I recently Googled a picture of Emmett Till, and it broke my heart. I'm almost crying right now when I saw that picture. And his mother had to be a powerful and strong woman to have her son represented like that.
Well, thank you, Joan, for sharing with us the importance, of this, of his murder and of that point in history, and, again, it's like George Floyd. We should all be learning from this. So. Margarita, why don't you help us close this program?
I wanted to respond to you because thank you for your comments. I think that it is true we share some struggle, but also we have differences. And you make a great point for the African American experience. And that's so important to acknowledge. And I think it's the power of our story. I am the story. The power to share our stories and respect each other's stories and work together. And the important to work intergenerational to understand how important is to listen to each other. How important I feel like there's so much energy and so much hope with the new generations. It's not like I'm so old, but my daughter is 30, my son is 23. And as a professor and as a community, so to bring that energy and for you guys to learn from us what we did, our mistake, what's working, what is not working, and that was the way that we can create change. Sharing the stories and working in collaboration. It's not about you are in one group and you are another group for race and gender, whatever, but also the power of our stories. And that's exactly what, just to close, what you're doing today. That's exactly to bring us together to share our story with ourselves and with you guys. And I feel I'm an activist. The next step is to follow up and get engaged. Is to get engaged. What are you doing just to really move, be part of this change? It's not to go home and, and being thinking about it. We are, we have power. We are power when we work together. And that's the message that I hope that we can, share. So connect with us. We are here. At least my center is open for everyone. And that I'm sure that everyone have a lot of ways to collaborate. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. In traditions, on New Year's Eve, different cultures have different things that they do. Like black people, we eat black-eyed peas for good luck, collard greens for money. In my church, we had 6 different things that resolution that the pastor asked us to do. I'm trying to remember all of them. One was love more, give more, gather more. I love you all. We're gathered here together. And one was to give more, use your talents. So in keeping with that spirit, I have roses that I would like to give to everybody. And my talent is I made these, and I'm giving them. So, Pastor, I'm keeping those 3 resolutions that you asked us to do. This is Pastor Worrell, my pastor. So I'd like everybody to have a rose before they leave. Thank you.
And thank you all so very much for coming. Come on up here. You can see some of Joan's artwork, and you can get your rose. Thank you all so very much.